in interesting times.
For the headlines.
Britain's Supreme Court ruled unlawful a decision by Prime Minister Boris Johnson to suspend Parliament in the run-up to Brexit, saying it was void and of no effect.
After a year spent protesting on the streets, it was Greta Thunberg's moment on the world stage, and she did not disappoint, discussing leaders of betrayal and repeatedly demanding "How dare you?" in a raw, emotional speech.
Google is not required to apply an EU right to be forgotten to its search engine domains outside Europe. The EU's top court ruled Tuesday in a landmark decision. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. And breaking news today, Britain's Supreme Court ruled unlawful a decision by Prime Minister Boris Johnson to suspend Parliament in the run-up to Brexit, saying it was void and of no effect. Take a listen.
This court has already concluded that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void and of no effect. This means that the order in Council to which it led was also unlawful, void and of no effect and should be quashed. This means that when the Royal Commissioners walked into the House of Lords, it was as if they had walked in with a blank sheet of paper. The prorogation was also void and of no effect. Parliament has not been prorogued.
Britain's Supreme Court ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson acted unlawfully in suspending Parliament in the run-up to Brexit, in a stunning blow that sparked immediate calls for him to resign. Prime Minister Johnson had argued that shutting down Parliament until October 14 was a routine move to allow his new government to set out a new legislative program. Johnson, who took office on July 24th, had advised Queen Elizabeth II as head of state to prorogue Parliament, which then took place early on September 10. He insisted it was a long overdue move unrelated to Brexit, but it sparked accusations that he was trying to avoid scrutiny from a hostile Parliament. Most members of the House of Commons opposed Johnson's threat to leave the European Union next month, even if he has not agreed exit terms with Brussels. The ruling means that Parliament was never prorogued, and so we assume that MPs are free to re-enter the Commons. Be you ever so mighty, the law is above you, even if you are the Prime Minister. The Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, said MPs should now reconvene immediately.
There is no need for the court to consider whether the Prime Minister's motive or purpose was unlawful. The third question, therefore, is whether this prorogation did have the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification. It is for Parliament, and in particular the Speaker and the Lord Speaker, to decide what to do next. Unless there is some parliamentary rule of which we are unaware, they can take immediate steps to enable each House to meet. It is not clear to us that any step is needed from the Prime Minister, but if it is, the Court is pleased that his counsel have told the Court that he will take all necessary steps to comply with the terms of any declaration made by this Court. To prorogue is
House of Commons Speaker John Bercow says that Britain's Parliament will prepare to resume proceedings on Wednesday after the Supreme Court ruled Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend it unlawful. Watch this.
In the light of that explicit judgment, I have instructed the House authorities to prepare not for the recall, the prorogation was unlawful and is void, to prepare for the resumption of the business of the House of Commons. Specifically, I've instructed the House authorities to undertake such steps as are necessary to ensure that the House of Commons sits tomorrow and that it does so at 11:30 a.m.
More reactions. Gina Miller, a pro-EU campaigner who attempted a legal action against Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to order the suspension of Parliament, said the Supreme Court's ruling proves that the United Kingdom is governed by the rule of law, that everyone, even the Prime Minister, is not above. Take a look.
It's a win for parliamentary sovereignty, the separation of powers and the independence of our British courts. Crucially, today's ruling confirms that we are a nation governed by the rule of law. Laws that everyone, even the Prime Minister, is not above. The ruling today speaks volumes. This Prime Minister must open the doors of Parliament tomorrow. MPs must get back and be brave and bold in holding this unscrupulous government to account.
This is a momentous day. This is probably the most important constitutional law decision ever in the history of Scots law and English law. And what must happen now is the MPs must go back to Parliament and must resume their jobs of holding this minority British government to account. So the Speaker will go back into Parliament, MPs will go back in, and we'll start our job again. If the British government don't have the guts to come to Parliament to face the MPs, then they can be forced to do so by the mechanism of members of Parliament tabling urgent questions, which if the Speaker allows, a government minister has to come to the dispatch box to answer.
Okay, well, I'm gonna head off then for a while.
Thank you.
16 children, including Swedish youth activist Greta Thunberg, announced on the same day as the UN's climate summit that they had filed a complaint with the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, alleging that 5 countries violated their rights by not doing enough to address the climate crisis.
My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
The complaint was filed through the 3rd optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of a Child, a voluntary mechanism which allows children or adults on their behalf to appeal directly to the United Nations for help if a country that has ratified the protocol fails to provide a remedy for the rights violation. The complaint aims to inspire the urgent action needed to curb global heating and mitigate the impact of the climate crisis. The 5 countries named in the complaint are Argentina, Brazil, France, Germany, and Turkey, have all ratified an additional protocol to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that allows children to petition the UN directly. None of the 5 is on a path needed to keep the planet from heating to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. The children state on a website created provide information about the complaint. The complaint alleges that these major economies, all members of the G20, are not doing enough to reduce emissions and keep global temperature rise to below 3 degrees Celsius.
My name is Alexandra Villasenor. I'm 14 years old, I'm from New York, and I'm here because 30 years ago, the world signed a contract between generations that the present world would leave a world worth inheriting to the future. And today, I want to tell the world, you are defaulting on that contract, and we're here to collect. We're here as citizens of the planet, as victims of the pollution that's been carelessly dumped into our land, air, and sea for generations, and as children whose rights are being violated. Today, we are fighting back. On behalf of all of us on the stage, I'm announcing that earlier this morning, we have filed an official complaint under the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Adopted on 20th of November 1989, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is an international human rights treaty outlining the civil, economic, social, political, and cultural rights of children without discrimination of any kind.
Meanwhile, Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, who often appears uncomfortable in the limelight and is seen as a reluctant leader, then detailed the various targets that were being missed, heightening the risk of irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. In the summit, she also took aim at called by Secretary General Antonio Guterres to ask countries to expand their commitments, saying this. Let's listen in.
But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
Pressure from climate activists and environmental activists ratcheted up on Friday with a day of global student strikes, bringing together some 4 million people who demanded that fossil fuels be curtailed. UN Chief Antonio Guterres, meanwhile, said he would not be a silent witness to the crime of dooming our present and destroying the right of future generations to a sustainable future.
This is not a climate talk summit. We have had enough talk. This is not a climate negotiating summit, because we don't negotiate with nature. This is a climate action summit. Dear friends, there is a cost to everything, but the biggest cost is doing nothing. The biggest cost is subsidizing a dying fossil fuel industry, building more and more coal power plants, and denying what is plain as day, that we are in a deep climate hole, and to get out, we must first stop digging. We face at least 3 degrees Celsius of global heating by the end of the century. I will not be there, but my granddaughters will, and your grandchildren too. I refuse to be an accomplice in the destruction of their own and only home. I will not be a silent witness to the crime of dooming our present and destroying their right to a sustainable future. It is my obligation, our obligation, to do everything to stop the climate crisis before it stops us.
Speaking at the United Nations Climate Action Summit, leaders from New Zealand, India, and Germany today presented their countries' plans to confront climate change.
We have introduced to Parliament the Zero Carbon Bill, the purpose of which is to ensure New Zealand lives within the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, necessary to avoid catastrophic weather events for our Pacific neighbours. We are strengthening our emissions trading scheme to more effectively price climate pollution. We aim to plant 1 billion trees by 2028. We have stopped issuing any new permits for offshore oil and gas exploration. In their place, we're investing in green hydrogen, biofuels, and the goal of 100% renewable electricity generation by 2023.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not say explicitly whether his country would enhance its commitments made under the Paris Agreement, though he did not say it was working on more than doubling its renewable energy capacity. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel repeated recently announced pledges including $55 billion for a new innovation and technology package and net zero emissions by 2050. French President Emmanuel Macron said young people around the world have identified an absolute urgency through their activism, adding that world leaders must respond. He said the world needs to move to carbon neutrality by 2050 and must keep to the Paris Agreement and be consistent with its objectives. Macron said the world also needed a trade agenda that serves the climate agenda. He called for a European trade agenda that is carbon neutral and zero imported deforestation. He said, this does not mean that Europe would not import certain things, but that any imports should have a negative consequence. If there is a negative consequence in terms of deforestation, for example, that has to be compensated. The French president said, if this was not implemented, we will continue to have fine words, but a trade agenda that runs counter to those words. This is essential work that we have to do. Macron underscored that countries could not advocate for the fight against climate change and for biodiversity, yet continue to finance infrastructure in other countries that is polluting, that increases CO2 emissions and runs counter to their commitments. Also speaking at the summit, State Councilor and Foreign Minister of China Wang Yi reaffirmed that China will faithfully fulfill our obligations under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement and meet its nationally determined contribution targets submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat. The state councilor added, "We will continue to jointly build a green belt and road through the Green Development Coalition under the Belt and Road Initiative. We are mobilizing stronger support for international cooperation against climate change." Wang also said that his country proposed over 150 initiatives and set up a group of friends for the Nature-Based Solutions, or NBS, mechanism to tap the mitigation potential of nature in order to cut CO2 emission by 10 to 12 billion tons. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the UK would double its climate change funding through an overseas development program to $14.4 billion over 5 years. In his closing comments, Guterres emphasized the positives, but says we have a long way to go.
This had to be a summit of action plans, not platitudes. I thank you for delivering. You understand the climate emergency is the fight of our lives and for our lives. I thank young people around the world for leading the charge and holding my generation accountable. We have been losing the race against climate crisis, but the world is waking up. Pressure is building, momentum is growing, and action by action the tide is turning. 77 countries, many in the industrialized world, committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. They were joined by 10 regions and more than 100 cities, including several of the world's largest. 70 countries announced they will boost their national determined contributions by 2020. Well over 100 leaders in the private sector committed to accelerating their move into the green economy. You have delivered a boost in momentum, cooperation and ambition. But we have a long way to go. We are not yet there. Much more is still needed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. We need more concrete plans, more ambition from more countries and more businesses. And we need all financial institutions, public and private, to choose once and for all the green economy. And we need to see much more progress on carbon pricing and ending coal and other fossil fuel subsidies in the months to come.
In the related news, Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg didn't appear too pleased when U.S. President Donald Trump made an unexpected appearance at the UN's climate summit. Take a look.
Welcome to the UN, sir. Are you welcome to the Thank you very much. Are you welcome to take a picture with me?
Bye, Greta.
After hinting that he would not attend, President Trump made an impromptu visit to the UN Climate Summit. President Trump did not speak, but he listened as his global counterparts voiced their concerns about climate change. Watch this.
Thank you, Excellency.
And let me also thank President Trump for coming today to the United Nations. Hopefully our discussions here will be useful for you when you formulate climate policy.
Welcome to the UN, sir. willing to speak? Thank you very much. Are you willing to make a testimony, sir?
I'm a big believer in clean air and clean water, and all countries should get together and do that, and they should do it for themselves. Very, very important.
Do you believe in climate change?
In other environment news, Brazil's defense minister said 63 people were arrested and issued fines amounting to $8.7 million after the military was sent to fight raging fires in the Amazon rainforest. Take a look. The announcement came as President Jair Bolsonaro arrived in New York to attend the UN General Assembly, where he said he would reaffirm the sovereignty of Brazil after the surge in blazes sparked international outcry. Amid the criticism, Bolsonaro in August authorized the deployment of the military to the Amazon in an operation that was extended to October 24. Defense Minister Fernando Azevedo e Silva told a press conference that the military made 571 land and 250 air raids to combat the fires in the rainforest, a major absorber of carbon dioxide that is home to one of the Earth's most concentrated and extensive collections of biological diversity. Based on research from the country's National Institute for Space Research, Brazil in August recorded 30,901 fires in the Amazon region, almost triple the 10,421 recorded in the same month in 2018, according to Azevedo. The minister also emphasized that the number of fires recorded so far this month in the rainforest was 17,095, well below the historical average for September of 33,426, while acknowledging that concerns remained over fires burning in certain areas, specifically the center of the forest. As the number of fires grew in Amazon, Bolsonaro, a far-right leader who has prioritized business over environmental and indigenous preservation, faced criticism within Brazil and abroad. The Brazilian president hit back, and he accused France and Germany of buying Brazil's sovereignty after the G7 group of rich democracies offered $20 million in Amazon fire aid.
United Nations warned Tuesday as scientists said the blazes were releasing vast amounts of greenhouse gases.
Angin dari tenggara dengan kecepatan antara 5 sampai dengan 10 km per jam. Itu juga kalau kita lihat memang titik api di Aceh memang tidak ada. Namun di provinsi lain di luar Aceh ada beberapa provinsi masih terjadi musibah kebakaran. Sehingga memungkinkan asap di sana untuk tersebar ke Aceh di bawah angin.
The fires have been spewing toxic haze over Southeast Asia in recent weeks, closing schools and airports with people rushing to buy face masks and seek medical treatment for respiratory ailments. Jakarta has deployed tens of thousands of personnel and water-bombing aircraft to tackle the slash and burn blazes set to clear agricultural land. The fires are an annual problem, but this year are the worst since 2015 due to dry weather. Almost 10 million people under 18, about a quarter below 5, live in the areas worst affected by fires on Indonesia's Sumatra Island and the country's part of Borneo Island, the UN Children's Agency UNICEF said. They said small children are especially vulnerable due to undeveloped immune systems, while babies born to mothers exposed to pollution during pregnancy may have low birth weights and be delivered early.
More than 24 people have died in riots in Indonesia's restive Papua region, according to authorities, as thousands fled to shelters following violence that saw civilians burned alive in buildings set ablaze by protesters. Papua, on the western half of New Guinea Island, has been paralyzed by weeks of protests fueled by anger over racism, as well as fresh calls for self-rule in the impoverished territory. Some 26 people died in Wamena City, where hundreds had demonstrated and burned down a government office and other buildings on Monday, according to authorities, adding that some perished in deliberately set fires. Most victims were non-Papuans, according to authorities, threatening an escalation in violence against migrants from other parts of the Southeast Asian archipelago. A soldier and 3 civilians also died in the provincial capital Jayapura, where security forces and stone-throwing protesters clashed on Monday. It was the taunting of the Papua students that triggered the violence earlier this year. But for many in the region, feelings of resentment towards Indonesia have been simmering for decades. The former Dutch colony did not become part of Indonesia until 1963, after a short period under UN control. A referendum on its independence was held in 1969, but only about 1,000 people were allowed to vote. As a result, a low-level separatist movement fighting for independence continues to this day.
Hong Kong's embattled leader said more than 20,000 people have applied to take part in a dialogue session with her and vent their anger at the government after 3 months of huge pro-democracy protests. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam said Thursday's meeting would be an opportunity for people to have their voices heard, but some protesters said they were not interested as their demands are already clear.
呢個社區嘅對話呢，係希望喺一個相對啦嚇，係一個和平理性冷靜嘅環境下邊進行。咁所以剛才你提到嘅規矩呢，都係為咗達至呢個唯一嘅目的嘅啫，並唔係話想控制一啲參加者佢當日表達啲乜嘢嘅意見。 事實上喺講規矩嘅同時咧，特區政府亦都對呢啲社區嘅對話作出一啲承諾，就係我哋承諾咧係不分背景、不分嘅政治立場，都係隨意俾參加者咧可以發表佢意見，甚至佢係要發表佢嘅憤怒。
Hong Kong has entered a 17th week of political unrest, which seen hundreds of rallies, some of which ended in violent clashes between police and protesters. More than 1,500 people have been arrested, the youngest age 12. Lam said she felt heartache seeing children being arrested and asked how well can children understand the current political issues.
你提到在这个3个多月，我们拘捕的人数现在已经超过1500人，里边的年纪比较轻的是18岁以下的也有不少啊。这个现象我个人感到非常的心疼啊，因为他们是孩子，孩子对于现在一些政治的问题有多明白、多了解，这个是我们必须要问的问题。 所以我还是在这里要呼吁，我们的家长、我们的老师、我们的校长，必须要为我们的孩子，让他们理解有些政治的问题不是这么简单，他们也必须。Now, the police has been undergoing a very difficult period, as I hope some of you will realize. This is a very long, drawn-out process. And filled with uncertainty and unpredictability. So sometimes you don't know when and where certain things will happen. The general comment is, of course, apart from some critical incidents where members of the public have major concerns and some different views, the fact that after over 3 months, we have not seen major fatalities in Hong Kong is by world standard, because I've been meeting overseas dignitaries and senior officials, is quite remarkable.
The protests were initially against a bill that would have allowed extradition to China, but have snowballed into wider calls for democracy and police accountability in the semi-autonomous city. Video emerged over the weekend of officers kicking a detained man wearing a yellow shirt in an alley. At a press conference Monday, a senior police officer suggested it was not clear the yellow object was a man and claimed the video might have been doctored, sparking ridicule online. Higher resolution footage of the same incident shows a man on the ground surrounded by police, one of whom kicked him. Police have repeatedly denied using excessive force, and Lam insisted they had exercised restraint.
Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mi punden so registration is ako August 1. Waaya edad ka na 15 to 17 nakapakay ka din ang mag-register a SK voter. Ug mano edad ka na 18 o dinamyakal Pasko 18 nakapakay ka mag-register a regular voter. Sungkano ko opisina o election officer sa iko ingadiyo na uban yung kalipati mawid sa valid ID. So, opisina o election officer na lumalaka ko isnin, taman ko Sabto, ko oras alas 8 sa kapipita, taman sa alas 5 ko kagabi. Igirap na holiday na lumalaka siran. Mga pagariyakan ko Islam na mag-register, tano din kataman buaya sa September 30. Paninta ko Allah at atapan iyan tano langon so kapipia ginawa. Wassalam.
Welcome back. Standing in a long line or sitting on their suitcases, anxious Thomas Cook passengers at Palma Airport faced an uncertain wait on Monday for a flight to Britain following the collapse of the travel giant. At the same time, many tourists arriving on Spain's resort island of Majorca for the start of their holidays found the hotel reservations they made through the company were not valid. Take a look.
We booked our hotel and the flight separate. So our hotel is booked from Thomas Cook, and we arrived here and stay at the reception from the hotel, and they said we never get money, so we have to pay the hotel twice.
The flight was good, but when we arrived in the hotel, the guy on the reception tell us that no money is going to the hotel.
I paid at the beginning of August the whole price, and now we have to pay the costs for the hotel twice. They treated me as I myself were insolvent, very, very badly.
As British tour operator Thomas Cook declared bankruptcy on Monday, some 600,000 tourists from around Europe had their holidays disrupted. Transport Minister Grant Shapps says that bankrupt Thomas Cook's business model was outdated and assures that an extremely complicated government operation is now underway to bring back tourists left stranded by the collapse of the British tour operator.
So the government obviously would do anything we could to support, but the reality is I think that times have changed, and this is a business that was still perhaps operating on a model that was good for, you know, the last century or the 1980s or something, but not for really the internet age where people were booking their own holidays so much. It's left a lot of people stranded, and we are working absolutely round the clock to bring everybody home, even those who are not at all protected. Won't be. This is an extremely complicated, biggest ever repatriation of citizens that we've ever gone through in peacetime. It won't be entirely plain sailing, but we're doing absolutely everything we can to help. So I hope very much for those people who work for Thomas Cook. We will work very closely with them. We're setting up a task force to make sure that we can help get them into new jobs and carry on with their lives. So with the Monarch collapse earlier in the last year, that cost £50 million to repatriate everyone. This is probably of the order of about 50% bigger than the Monarch collapse. So that kind of gives some sort of estimation.
U.S. securities regulators on Monday charged Japanese automaker Nissan and its former CEO Carlos Ghosn with hiding more than $140 million in Ghosn's expected retirement income from investors. Ghosn will pay $1 million in fines to settle the matter and will be barred from serving as a corporate executive for 10 years, the Securities and Exchange Commission said in a statement. Nissan will pay a $15 million fine. The SEC also charged ex-board member Greg Kelly with aiding in the fraud. He agreed to a $100,000 fine and a 5-year corporate officer ban. But Ghosn, his former right-hand man, Kelly, and Nissan neither admitted nor denied the SEC's allegations. Attorneys for Ghosn welcomed the deal, saying it allowed him to focus on fighting similar allegations in Japan. The SEC said Ghosn, 65, working with Kelly and other subordinates, devised ways to disguise large amounts of Ghosn's compensation. The machinations allegedly stemmed from a shift in Japanese policy in 2009 that required disclosure of individual director compensation above 100 million yen, a little more than $1 million at the time. Ghosn became concerned about criticism that might result in the Japanese and French media if his total compensation became publicly known, the SEC said. Ghosn directed subordinates to lobby the Japanese government to rescind the policy. When that failed, the SEC order said Ghosn and Nissan subordinates took steps to conceal from public disclosure a substantial portion of Ghosn's compensation. Ghosn and Kelly allegedly fraudulently inflated Ghosn's pension allowance by more than $15 million and created a false disclosure to disguise the increase, the SEC said in an order. Subordinates of Ghosn falsely told the company's chief financial officer that another big set of payments under a long-term incentive plan went to many Nissan employees and not primarily to Ghosn, the order said. Ghosn also instructed an employee to change the currency in which Ghosn's pension would be paid. Under a 2007 compensation agreement, the SEC said Ghosn was to be paid in yen, but a 2011 clause allowed Ghosn to choose whether to be paid in yen or US dollars, resulting in an increase of about $22 million in retirement payments.
Top Chinese telecom executive Meng Wanzhou and her lawyers went to court on Monday to try to have her extradition case thrown out, arguing that her rights were violated. The 47-year-old Huawei chief financial officer was detained during a stopover at the Vancouver airport last December on a U.S. warrant. The United States wants to put Meng on trial for fraud for allegedly violating Iran sanctions and lying about it to U.S. banks, accusations her lawyers dispute. Meng, a rising star whose father Ren Zhengwei founded Huawei and over 3 decades grew it into a global telecom giant, expressed surprise when told she was being arrested, according to a transcript of her speaking with authorities after her flight from Hong Kong landed. Her detention caused an unprecedented diplomatic rift between Canada and China. In a preliminary disclosure hearing at the British Columbia Supreme Court, defense lawyers asked for details from prosecutors about her arrest, and they're also expected to seek the release of documents in a separate civil proceeding this week against federal police and border officials officials in which they allege false imprisonment and other rights breaches. Evidence from both hearings could be used to argue a violation and process and, if successful, put pressure on the Attorney General to reconsider a decision to proceed with the extradition. Defense lawyer Richard Peck told the court that the Canada Border Services Agency, or CBSA, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police delayed her arrest and collected evidence for American authorities in a covert criminal investigation. He laid out how border agents detained Mang under the pretense of an immigration matter and never alerted her to a U.S. warrant for her arrest. While using passwords, she volunteered to snoop through her computers and phones. They also questioned her for 3 hours without advising her of her rights, he said, before eventually handing her over to federal police. Peck also said the facts establish that the CBSA and the RCMP collaborated and arranged a plan to deal with Ms. Mang in a way that violated her rights.
Google is not required to apply an EU right to be forgotten to its search engine domains outside Europe, the EU's top court ruled Tuesday in a landmark decision. The European Court of Justice handed victory to Google in the case, seen as crucial in determining whether EU online regulation should apply beyond Europe's borders or not. The U.S. internet giant had argued that the removal of search results required under EU law should not extend to its google.com domain or its other non-EU sites. The court ruled that while a search engine operator such as Google must carry out dereferencing as link of links as demanded by a regulator or court in an EU state to all European versions of its sites, that right to be forgotten did not need to go further. The court said there is no obligation under EU law for search engine operators such as Google to carry out such a dereferencing in all the versions of its search engines. But it did stress that dereferencing on EU sites must include measures to seriously discourage a European internet user being able to get around the right to be forgotten by accessing unrestricted results from a search engine on a non-EU domain. That demands geo-blocking, which Google says it already uses effectively in Europe. Savvy internet users, however, can get around that measure with a VPN that masks the user's location or by going to some non-Google search engines.
Members of the CGT Workers' Union gathered in Marseille to protest against the French government's planned pension reforms. President Macron's government has just launched one of the most ambitious reforms of his presidency to merge France's 42 different pension systems into a single points-based system. The president says it will be fairer, but some professions say they will lose out. The French retirement age is currently 62, with retirees receive on average 61% of previous earnings pre-tax, according to OECD figures. This is less than in Italy, which is 83%, but far more than in Germany, 38%. Overall, France spends early or nearly 14% less than Italy. That is 16%, but more than Germany, which is 10%, and way above the 8% average. The 2010 President Sarkozy raised the minimum age from 60 to 62 years and the age for a full pension without penalties from 65 to 67. However, because many professions have their own pension rules, many people are allowed to retire much earlier than this, so that the male retirement age is on average still only 60. Now, France has 42 different mandatory public pension systems, which have grown up over the decades to serve professions from farmer to mine engineers to notaries and so on. Some workers fear losing out as a result of change far more than others. President Macron has promised to merge all these regimes into a single points-based system that treats all workers equally, a difficult task as rules governing pension rights and contributions vary markedly between them.
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
Huli na MTRCV.
Tinala, to ongoing ni sa voter registration niya COMELEC. Para sa reman tao'y 15 hanggang 17, sarap to kayo mong parehistro kung paano makaboto kayo at SK elections. Para sa reman tao'y 18 patagay, sarap to kayo mong parehistro kung paano manmalo kayon regular voters. Mga wit kilabat ya ID ya wala address to, is sa COMELEC Office of the Election Officer sa lugar yo. Lukas sa COMELEC ya alas 8 ya kabuasan hanggang alas 5 yung araw, ya Lunes hanggang Sabato, pati holidays. Hanggang September 30, 2019 labatla sa voter registration. Katananta na alaga rin nyo, parehistro kila!
Our ABC correspondent Eliza Ventura takes us to the rural town of Mount Isa, located in northwest Queensland. Eliza?
With golden soil and wealth for toil, a line borrowed from the Australian anthem that perfectly describes this rural town of Mount Isa. Located in northwest Queensland, this outback town is about 2,000 kilometers away, or an equivalent of a full-day drive from the nearest capital city, Brisbane. This town's population is about 20,000. Mount Isa continues to flourish and thrive as a town situated in the middle of the Australian outback. Mount Isa became a town on the year 1923. Long before the township was formed, the land where Mount Isa stands was home to the Kalkadoon Aboriginal tribe. Then in 1923, it was said that John Campbell Miles, a land prospector, found rich silver and lead deposits around the land. This has led to the formation of Mount Isa mines. The town was developed and established alongside the local mining organization. Until this day, Mount Isa is well known as a mining town. The Mount Isa mines remained as one of Australia's and the world's biggest production for copper, lead, silver, and zinc. After 9 decades since the town's establishment, Mount Isa continued to grow. A number of businesses has been established throughout the years due to the increasing population demands. A variety of annual events are held which draws in hundreds and thousands of tourists to visit Mount Isa. The most popular event held in town is the Mount Isa Rodeo, the biggest rodeo in the Southern Hemisphere and the third largest rodeo event in the world. It has been said by the town locals that you have never experienced the real Australia unless you have visited Mount Isa. Experience and explore this great jewel of a town hidden in the red-soiled outback here in Queensland, Australia. This is Alyssa Ventura from EBC Australia, and I am one with 25.
Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you, Eliza. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and
We're one with 25.